Welcome to the channel, my alien friends. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Enjoy listening. The streets of Nova Prime's pleasure district hummed with life, bathed in an electric glow of neon colors. Holographic advertisements floated above the crowd, promising indulgences that stretched from the mind to the flesh. Instant ecstasy, eternal life, forbidden pleasures from every corner of the galaxy. But for Jace Varlin, none of it mattered. The mission was all that held his focus. His wrist computer blinked to life, signaling an update. Tyrell Ven's location had been confirmed. He was holed up in Supernova, one of Nova Prime's most notorious nightclubs, where anything could be bought or sold if you had enough credits or leverage. Jace grinned. A high-profile arms dealer like Tyrell, known for selling to the galaxy's worst factions, had finally made a mistake. Tonight, Jace would claim his bounty. The streets thinned as he approached the entrance to the club. Martian traders, their crimson skin flushed darker from synthetic alcohol, stumbled past him, oblivious to the deadly intent masked behind his calm demeanor. One of them nudged his companion, recognizing the tall, broad-shouldered figure with a hunter's bearing. "Is that Jace Varlin, the legend?" The Martian slurred. Jace smirked, tipping an imaginary hat as he moved past them. Nova Prime was a galaxy of whispers, and his name had become one of them, a hunter of notorious skill. His success rate unmatched. But to him, that didn't matter. Only the hunt did. Stepping through the entrance to Supernova, he was greeted by a wave of music so deep it rattled his bones. The walls of the club seemed to shimmer with liquid silver, bending the light in a surreal display. Anti-grav platforms hovered above the ground, where exotic dancers from different species performed impossible routines that defied both gravity and modesty. Each private booth sparkled under privacy fields, protecting its inhabitants from prying eyes, while adding an air of mystery to whatever deals or pleasures were being traded inside. Jace made his way to the bar, eyes scanning the crowd, seeking the subtle irregularities in movement that could betray his prey. His enhanced vision allowed him to catch the smallest details: a quick glance, the nervous twitch of fingers, an exchange of credits. He ordered a lunar whiskey. Neat. The bartender, a four-armed Diluvian, poured it with reverence, clearly aware of who he was serving. As the burn of the whiskey hit his throat, his gaze fell upon a strange sight at the far end of the club. A cluster of admirers, their eyes wide with infatuation, surrounded a figure so out of place she seemed to distort the very fabric of the room. She was alien, and yet something more than that. Her skin, a deep sapphire blue, shimmered under the club's lights like polished stone. Silver eyes cut through the dimness, cold and calculating. She lounged in one of the private booths, reclining like a queen among her court of lesser beings. The dress she wore clung to her body as though painted on, revealing a figure that could start wars with a single glance. Jace's wrist computer vibrated, drawing his attention for a moment. Tyrell Ven's location had shifted. His target was now moving to the club's VIP section. But something about the woman stopped him from leaving just yet. There was a precision to her posture, an air of danger beneath the surface elegance that made his instincts flare. And then, she spoke. "I'd sooner sleep with a Centurion slime beast than waste my time on a human." Her voice dripped with disdain, though melodious in its delivery. "Especially that Jace Varlin character everyone's so obsessed with." Jace's grip tightened on his glass, his knuckles turning white. The burn of the whiskey did nothing to douse the fire her words ignited. He had faced down pirates, warlords, and killers across the galaxy without flinching. But something about her smug dismissal crawled under his skin. Before he could stop himself, Jace was walking toward her booth, a predatory smile playing on his lips. His reputation usually preceded him, and that was enough to silence most critics. But this, whoever she was, had no idea who she was dealing with. She noticed his approach, her silver eyes narrowing slightly before recognition dawned. A flicker of amusement crossed her features, followed by a barely concealed smirk. "Speaking of the devil," she murmured, her voice low, mocking. "Come to prove me right about human arrogance, Varlin? Just thought I'd give you the chance to insult me to my face, Miss Karis," he said, leaning casually against the edge of the table, ignoring the wide-eyed stares of her companions. "Rena Karis," she replied, not offering her hand. Her tone was icy, dismissive, her gaze assessing him with the same indifference one might show a mildly interesting insect. "And I wasn't insulting you. I was simply stating facts." "Facts?" Jace's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Like the fact that I've taken down more high-level targets than anyone in this sector, or that I've got an unmatched success rate?" Raina's eyes flitted over him, unimpressed. "Facts like humans being predictable, overconfident, and..." She let her gaze linger on him a little longer. "Disappointingly simple." The air between them seemed to crackle. Her admirers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension brewing. But before Jace could respond, a new figure joined the exchange, one whose presence sent a ripple of recognition through the club. A tall, sleek figure with metallic skin and glowing, cat-like eyes stepped forward. His smile was flawless, the kind that hid 100 knives. Zaithkor bounty hunter, but one with far looser morals and a reputation for betrayal. The fact that he was here, beside Rhina, sent alarms ringing in Jace's mind. "Rena, darling," Zaith purred, casting a sideways glance at Jace. "You're not wasting your breath on this, Earther, are you?" Rhina's lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just discussing cultural differences," she said smoothly. "But I'm sure you'd rather discuss something more stimulating." "Allow me," Zaith said, his smile widening as he extended his hand to her, ignoring Jace entirely. "Come, leave the riffraff behind." As Rhina accepted his hand, her eyes briefly flickered back to Jace, amusement glinting in her silver gaze. Jace clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. As they walked away toward the VIP section, his wrist computer vibrated again. Target spotted, VIP section. Moving to secondary location. Jace watched as they disappeared into a private room upstairs. The hunt had just become more complicated. And if he read Rena Karras right, she was playing a deeper game than he had first suspected. His mind raced, the thrill of the hunt quickening his pulse. He'd come here for Tyrell Ven. But now it seemed like he had two targets, both dangerous in their own ways. And one of them, the blue-skinned beauty, was about to learn that humans weren't as simple as she thought. Taking one last sip of his whiskey, Jace pushed away from the table, his thoughts already formulating a new plan. Tonight, it wasn't just about the bounty anymore. It was personal. The shadows deepened as Jace slipped past the VIP bouncer, the heavyset Kren's tentacles twitching in suspicion as he scanned Jace's bounty hunter credentials. A small nod was all Jace received before the creature stepped aside, but the tension crackling in the air told him this section of the club wasn't for the faint-hearted. Up here, deals were made with blood and credits, often in equal measure. He moved cautiously, his enhanced vision picking up the subtlest movements, the shift of a hand beneath a cloak, a murmured conversation cutting off as he passed, the glint of concealed weapons. But his mind remained fixed on the two figures he had followed. Tyrell Ven, the elusive arms dealer, and Rhina Karras, the blue-skinned enigma who had not only insulted him but also stolen his attention. In a private room up ahead, a gathering had formed. The low hum of voices behind the sound-dampening field sparked Jace's instincts. He couldn't hear their words, but he felt the weight of their significance. Through the dim lighting and hazy privacy screens, he spotted Ven's unmistakable figure surrounded by his muscle. Hulking bodyguards outfitted with cybernetic enhancements that made them more machine than human. But it wasn't Ven who pulled Jace's focus. It was Rhina, standing just off to the side, her silver eyes calculating and unreadable as she spoke with Ven, her expression smooth as polished glass. Whatever their connection was, it went deeper than a passing flirtation. A woman like Rhina didn't get involved with men like Ven without having something to gain. Jace's gut tightened as he watched her movements. Her lithe body shifting with an elegance that belied the danger she radiated. She had seemed so dismissive of him earlier, but now, watching her speak with Ven, there was no mistaking her role in this operation. She wasn't just an accessory, she was a player in the game, and from the looks of it, a dangerous one. Stay focused, Jace reminded himself. The hunt was Tyrell, not her. And yet, his wrist computer buzzed with a new alert, an encrypted message flashing across his retinal display. Jace's stomach clenched. It was a hit order, sent through the black market communication network. Target, Jace Varlin. Issuer, Tyrell Ven. They knew he was here. A slow, cold grin spread across Jace's face. So Tyrell wanted him dead. That only meant one thing. He was getting closer. But this also changed the stakes. Ven wasn't just going to let him walk out of here alive, and with Rhina clearly wrapped up in this conspiracy, Jace knew he needed to shift his approach. Before he could formulate his next move, the door to the private room slid open, and out stepped Zeth Koros, his silver eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He exchanged a brief glance with Rhina, something unspoken passing between them, before his gaze landed squarely on Jace. Well, if it isn't the legendary Jace Varlin, Zaith crooned, his metallic voice dripping with mockery. I must say, I didn't expect to see you lurking in the shadows. Still chasing ghosts, or are you finally here to learn how the big boys play? Jace's expression remained hard as stone. I play my own game, Koros. Zaith's lips curled into a smirk, his cat-like eyes narrowing. Oh, I'm sure you do. But it seems you're outnumbered tonight. Tyrell doesn't take kindly to those poking around his business, especially when they don't know their place. From the corner of his eye, Jace saw Rhina watching him intently. There was no mockery in her gaze now, only a sharp, unsettling awareness. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, and for a moment it was just the two of them, locked in silent scrutiny. "Jace Varlin," she said softly, her voice smooth as silk yet laced with something darker. "I told you before, humans are predictable. Here you are, just as expected, nosing into business you don't understand." Jace's jaw clenched. "I understand enough. Tyrell's not the only one I'm after tonight." The words hung between them, a challenge. Rhina's eyes flickered, betraying nothing, but something in her posture shifted, a momentary crack in her icy composure. Her lips curved into a half-smile, more predatory than amused. "Careful, Jace. You might find you've bitten off more than you can chew." Before Jace could respond, Zaith intervened, stepping between them. Now, he said with a mocking laugh. "Let's not make this personal. After all, we're just here for business, aren't we?" But Jace wasn't fooled. Every word, every glance was dripping with layers of deception, and he knew that what was about to unfold went far deeper than just a bounty. Rena Karras was playing her own game, and Tyrell Venn was only part of it. But if she thought she had the upper hand, she was wrong. Jace moved in closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't worry. I always finish what I start." As he turned to walk away, he felt Rhina's eyes burning into his back. This hunt had become more than a simple job. It had become a battle of wits and desire, and he was far from finished. The game had just begun. The night sky above Nova Prime's Pleasure District seemed endless, a sea of swirling purple clouds illuminated by the planet's twin moons. It would have been beautiful, if not for the danger that lingered beneath its surface. Jace Varlin paced the alley behind the club, his mind racing through 1,000 different scenarios. He had known from the beginning that Nova Prime's underworld was a tangle of lies, secrets, and betrayals, but something about tonight felt different, heavier. Rena Karras. She was at the center of it all, her web of influence wrapping tighter around the people involved. What disturbed him most, though, was the sense that, against his better judgment, he was getting caught in it too. The way she had looked at him in the club earlier, not with disdain this time, but with something darker. Something that sent a shiver down his spine, even as it stirred his curiosity. His wrist computer blinked, the name of his contact, one of Ven's former allies, flickering across the screen. Information he'd paid handsomely for, and it had better be worth it. As he keyed in the access code for the secure message, Jace leaned against the alley wall, his hand resting on the grip of his blaster. He was expecting the usual, Tyrell Ven's latest movements, maybe a location on his next deal. But what he saw made his blood run cold. Target for elimination, Rhina Karras. Deadline, 12 hours. Jace stared at the message, his stomach twisting. Rena's brother. He was to be the scapegoat, the fall guy for Tyrell's entire operation. Ven had planned this all along, no doubt securing Rhina's cooperation with empty promises before pulling the rug out from under him. And Rhina? Did she know? Was she complicit in this? No. She couldn't be. But that doubt lingered, gnawing at him like a predator waiting for its moment to strike. Jace pushed off the wall, adrenaline coursing through him. He couldn't afford to waste time. He had to find Rhina, and fast. He slipped through the back streets, the city's neon lights casting long shadows across his path. Every instinct told him this was a trap, that getting involved in Rhina's family affairs was a mistake. But he couldn't ignore the tightness in his chest, the unshakable feeling that things had already spun beyond his control. By the time he reached the coordinates where his contact said Rhina would be, the tension had grown into a storm inside him. A rundown warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows and rusted walls standing out against the sleek skyline of Nova Prime's upper districts. Jace approached quietly, his blaster drawn. This could be a setup, but he didn't care. He needed answers. Slipping inside, he scanned the shadows until he found her. Rena stood in the center of the room, her arms crossed and her silver eyes cold. Her usual grace was gone, replaced by an intensity he hadn't seen before. But it wasn't him she was glaring at, it was Szeth Koros, the metal-skinned bounty hunter who now stood just a few feet from her, his smirk practically glowing in the dim light. "You lied to me," Rena hissed, her voice laced with venom. "You promised me my brother would be safe. You swore, Szeth." Szeth's smirk never wavered. "I promised you what you wanted to hear, darling. Business is business, and Tyrell needed a fall guy. Your brother was convenient. You knew the game when you signed up to play it." Rena's hand twitched toward her blaster, but Szeth raised a metallic finger, clicking his tongue. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. Not unless you want to see Rhina's body on display tomorrow." Jace's blood boiled as he watched the exchange, the betrayal sinking deep into his bones. For a moment he considered staying hidden, letting Rhina deal with the consequences of her entanglements. But then he saw it, the flash of pain that crossed her features, brief but undeniable. She was trapped. And whether he liked it or not, Jace couldn't just walk away. "Drop it, Koros," Jace called out, stepping from the shadows, his blaster aimed squarely at Szeth's head. Szeth turned slowly, his grin widening. "Ah, Varlin. I was wondering when you'd show up. Here to play hero for our blue-skinned beauty?" Jace's eyes flicked to Rhina. She was tense, her body coiled like a predator, but her silver gaze softened slightly when it met his. She hadn't expected him to come for her, and maybe she hadn't expected anyone to. "Get out of here," Jace said to her, his voice low and steady. "I'll deal with this." But Rhina didn't move. Instead, she squared her shoulders, raising her chin in that defiant way of hers. "No, this is my mess, and I'm going to fix it." A silence fell between them, broken only by Szeth's mocking laughter. "Touching? Really, it is. But you're both missing the point." He gestured to the doorway behind them. "Even if you kill me, Ven's already sent his men to finish Ryko." "You're too late." Jace's heart pounded in his chest. He knew Szeth wasn't bluffing. Every second they stood here, Ryko's life was slipping away. But before he could move, Rhina was already in motion, her blaster drawn as she fired at Szeth in a blur of speed. He dodged the first shot, but Jace followed up with a second, catching Szeth square in the shoulder and sending him sprawling to the ground. Without a word, Rhina turned and sprinted toward the exit, her movements fast and fluid, a woman driven by desperation. Jace followed close behind, the warehouse fading into the night as they both raced against the clock. As they ran through the winding streets, Jace found himself wondering if this was what betrayal always felt like, the weight of lies, of half-truths, pressing down until you couldn't breathe. Rhina was running toward her brother, but she was also running from something else. Something deeper. And Jace, for all his cold calculations, knew he was running right beside her. He didn't know if they could stop Ven in time. He didn't know if Ryko would live, but as the stars above Nova Prime gleamed brighter, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about the bounty anymore. The stellar dawn hung in orbit like a dead star, once a glittering luxury cruiser, now a rusted monument to decadence and decay. What had once been a vessel for the elite to indulge their every pleasure was now a husk, a perfect cover for Tyrell Ven's illegal arms operation. Its halls echoed with the whispers of deals made in shadows and lives traded for credits. Jace Varlin gripped the controls of his sleek black ship, his pulse pounding in his ears as the cruiser loomed larger through the cockpit window. Next to him, Rhina Karis sat in stony silence, her silver eyes fixed ahead, her knuckles white as she clenched the edge of her seat. She hadn't spoken since they had left Nova Prime, but her tension was palpable. Her brother, Ryko, was somewhere aboard that ship, and time was running out. "Are you ready for this?" Jace asked, his voice low, keeping his focus on the target. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on them both. "I don't have a choice," Rhina replied, her voice clipped. "If we don't stop Ven now, Ryko's as good as dead." Jace glanced at her from the corner of his eye. Her usually unshakable composure was starting to crack. There was a vulnerability beneath her cold exterior, a crack in the armor that made her seem almost human, almost like someone he could trust. Almost. "We'll get him out," Jace said, his tone firmer now, like he was trying to convince himself as much as her. Rhina's gaze shifted toward him, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached for the blaster at her side, checking its charge before securing it back into its holster. Her movements were fluid, practiced. She was preparing for war, but Jace could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. He knew what it was like to be caught between duty and desperation. But with Rhina, the stakes were personal. She was fighting for family, and that made her dangerous in a way that both intrigued and unsettled him. As they approached the cruiser's docking bay, Jace activated the ship's stealth systems, the hum of the engine dropping to a barely audible whisper. The Stellar Dawn's security systems were light, almost as if Tyrell Ven didn't expect anyone to be stupid enough to attack him on his own turf. Jace was counting on that arrogance. They docked silently, slipping aboard like shadows in the void. The air inside the cruiser was stale, the corridors dimly lit by flickering lights that cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. Jace's senses were on high alert, every sound, every shadow sending a fresh jolt of adrenaline through his system. Rhina moved ahead of him, her steps light and deliberate, her hand hovering near her blaster as they crept through the ship. She knew the layout. Ven's arrogance extended to his choice of hiding spots, and it was clear she had been on board before. But this time, it wasn't for a deal or a meeting. This time, she was here to take something back. They reached the luxury suite where Raiko was being held, and Jace's gut twisted as he saw the state of the room. Once filled with opulence, it had been transformed into a makeshift prison. Raiko, a younger version of Rhina with the same blue skin and striking features, lay slumped against the wall, his wrists bound, his face bruised and battered. He looked up as they entered, confusion flickering across his face before recognition dawned. "Sister," he croaked, his voice weak. "You came." Rena was already at his side, working to free his restraints, her face a mask of grim determination. "I told you I would. We're getting you out of here." Jace kept his eyes on the door, his fingers twitching over his blaster. This was going too smoothly, and his instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Too few guards, too little resistance. Ven wouldn't leave a loose end like Raiko unguarded without a reason. As if on cue, an alarm blared, echoing through the corridors, and the doors slammed shut with a mechanical hiss, trapping them inside. Jace cursed under his breath, already moving toward the control panel by the door, but it was locked down tight. "Damn it," he muttered, his fingers flying across the keypad. "Ven knew we were coming." Of course he did. A voice crackled through the ship's intercom, and Jace's blood turned to ice. Tyrell Ven's voice was oily, smug, as it filled the room. "Did you really think I'd let you walk onto my ship and take my prisoner? I've been expecting you, Varlin. And Rhina, my dear, I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter than this." Rhina stood, her blaster drawn, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're gonna regret this, Ven." A low, mocking laugh echoed through the intercom. "I don't think so. You see, I've already won. Raiko is just the bait, and you, Rhina, you're the real prize. You've been playing both sides for far too long, and now it's time to pay the price." Jace shot a glance at Rhina, his mind racing. There was something Ven wasn't saying, something he was holding back. And then it hit him. The trap wasn't just for Raiko. It was for both of them. "Rhina?" Jace said quietly, stepping closer to her. "We need to get out of here. Now." But before they could move, the walls around them hissed, and gas began pouring through the vents. Rhina's eyes widened in panic, and Jace grabbed her arm, pulling her toward Raiko. "This isn't over," he growled, his mind racing as he searched for a way out. But the truth was they were trapped, and Ven was tightening the noose. Every second they spent here brought them closer to death. And Jace couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The gas thickened, a toxic fog seeping into every corner of the luxury suite, its acrid stench burning Jace's lungs. He grabbed Rhina by the arm and pulled her closer to the door, his mind racing. His eyes stung, and his vision blurred at the edges, but his focus remained sharp. They had to get out before the gas did its work, before Tyrell Ven sealed their fate. Rhina coughed, her silver eyes frantic as she fumbled with her wrist computer, trying to override the ship's ventilation systems. Her usually composed exterior had shattered, revealing the fear underneath. She was suffocating, trapped in a nightmare of Ven's making, and for the first time since Jace had met her, he saw her falter. "I can't," she started, her voice strained, but Jace interrupted her. "Breathe later, think now," he barked, gripping her shoulders. "We don't have time." He kicked at the control panel by the door, but the steel frame didn't budge. The room was sealing them in, and he could feel the poison working its way into his bloodstream. His muscles ached, his head felt heavy, but he forced himself to push through the pain. Behind them, Raiko groaned, struggling to stay conscious. Rhina turned toward him, her expression torn between desperation and determination. "We can't leave him," she said, her voice trembling, but there was a hardness beneath the fear, a will that wouldn't break. Jace met her gaze, seeing the same fire that had caught his attention when they first met. She wasn't going to quit. Not now. Not when her brother's life was hanging in the balance. "I'm not leaving anyone," Jace growled. "But first we need to survive this." He yanked her closer, pressing his wrist computer to hers, linking their systems. His fingers flew across the keypad, working on overriding the door controls, while Rhina hacked into the ventilation system. The seconds stretched into agonizing minutes as they fought against time, the gas seeping into their every breath. Suddenly, the door controls blinked red, signaling a temporary override. The door hissed as it slid open a crack, and Jace grabbed Raiko by the arm, hauling him to his feet. They stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air, but they weren't safe yet. The corridors were eerily silent, and Jace's gut told him that Ven had something else waiting for them. As if on cue, the sound of heavy boots echoed down the hall. Jace tensed, reaching for his blaster, his mind already calculating their next move. Ven's goons would be closing in fast. There was no way Ven was letting them walk off this ship alive. "We have to keep moving," Jace said, his voice hard. "Head for the hangar. We'll get Raiko to the ship." Rhina nodded, her expression grim as she threw one of Raiko's arms over her shoulders to help him walk. The urgency in her steps mirrored Jace's own. Every corner, every shadow was a potential threat, and they moved like ghosts through the dimly lit halls of the stellar dawn, their footsteps muffled by the hum of the dying ship. Suddenly, they rounded a corner and came face to face with a squad of Ven's enforcers, cybernetic implants glowing under the flickering lights. They raised their weapons in unison, blocking the way to the hangar. Jace cursed under his breath. There was no time to think, no time to plan, only time to act. "Get down," he yelled, shoving Rhina and Raiko behind a stack of cargo crates just as the first plasma bolt streaked past them, sizzling through the air. Jace ducked and returned fire, his enhanced reflexes guiding each shot. It was chaos. The narrow corridor exploded with blinding flashes of blue and red as bolts of energy ricocheted off the walls. Jace moved with deadly precision, each shot finding its mark, but there were too many of them. He felt the heat of a bolt graze his arm, searing his skin, but he didn't flinch. Pain was secondary, survival was everything. Rhina wasn't far behind him. She had dropped Raiko safely behind the crates and joined the fight, her blaster firing with a cold fury that matched her expression. She moved like a dancer, fluid and lethal, her shots finding their targets with surgical precision. But for every enforcer they took down, more emerged from the shadows. Jace's chest tightened as he realized they were being funneled, herded into a trap with no way out. He could feel his strength waning, the gas still working its way through his system, slowing his reactions. A plasma bolt slammed into the wall inches from Rhina's head, sending sparks raining down. Jace's heart lurched, but she barely flinched, her focus razor-sharp. "We can't stay here," Rhina shouted over the gunfire, ducking behind the crates. "They'll pin us down." Jace's eyes darted around the corridor, searching for an exit. His gaze locked onto a vent high above the floor, just wide enough for them to crawl through. "Up there," he called, pointing toward the vent. "It's our only shot." Rhina's eyes followed his, and she nodded without hesitation. Jace fired a few more shots, covering her as she scrambled toward the wall, hoisting herself up with the grace of someone who had done this 100 times before. She reached down, grabbing Raiko's arm and pulling him up after her. Jace was the last to climb, his body protesting with every movement, but he refused to let the pain slow him down. The three of them crawled through the narrow vent, the sound of the firefight growing distant behind them. Jace's breath came in ragged gasps, his vision swimming, but he kept moving. The weight of Rhina's presence ahead of him, her determination, was the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. Finally, they emerged into a storage bay near the hangar, the cold metal of the ship's interior feeling like salvation. "We're close," Jace rasped, pushing himself to his feet. "The ship's just beyond that door." Rhina helped Raiko to his feet, her face pale but resolute. "Let's finish this." As they moved toward the door, Jace glanced at Rhina, a mixture of admiration and something else flickering in his chest. They had survived the gas, the enforcers, and the overwhelming odds stacked against them. But the dance wasn't over yet. Tyrell Ven was still out there, and their survival had only bought them time. The real fight was just beginning. The stellar dawn shuddered underfoot as explosions rocked the ship, fires spreading through its decaying hull. Jace Farland sprinted through the final corridor leading to the hangar, his blaster still warm in his hand. He didn't need to look back to know Rhina was close behind, guiding her barely conscious brother. The clock was ticking, and every second felt like a lifetime. "Keep moving," Jace shouted over his shoulder, his voice barely audible above the wailing sirens and the rumble of the ship breaking apart around them. The blast doors to the hangar slid open with a groan, revealing their escape, the sleek black lines of Jace's stealth ship shimmering against the backdrop of space. But standing between them and salvation was Tyrell Ven, flanked by two heavily armed enforcers. The oily smile on his scarred face sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through Jace's veins. "Going somewhere, Varlin?" Ven sneered, his blaster trained squarely on Jace. His eyes flicked to Rhina, then to Raiko, who was barely able to stand. "I told you, Rhina, you're playing out of your league. You should have stayed loyal." Jace's jaw clenched, his blaster raised but his mind racing. Ven's arrogance was palpable, but there was no denying the danger he posed. This was a man who had survived 1,000 betrayals, each one sharpening the blade of his cruelty. Ven didn't just kill his enemies, he destroyed them piece by piece. But Jace had come too far to let this snake win now. "Loyalty?" Rhina's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She stepped forward, her silver eyes blazing with fury, her hands steady on her blaster. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You sold out Raiko to save yourself." Ven's smile widened, a smug grin that made Jace's blood boil. Of course I did. And you? You've betrayed every ally you've ever had. Did you think I wouldn't see this coming? Rhina hesitated for the briefest moment, her eyes flickering with a flash of something Jace couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? He didn't have time to think about it. In the next heartbeat, Ven signaled his enforcers to attack, and the hangar erupted in gunfire. Jace moved on instinct, diving behind a stack of crates as plasma bolts seared through the air. His pulse pounded in his ears, his every breath burning in his lungs as he returned fire. His blaster kicked in his hand, each shot finding its mark, but Ven's enforcers were relentless, closing in from both sides. "Rena," Jace called out, ducking behind cover as another bolt scorched the metal wall above his head. "Get Raiko to the ship." But she wasn't listening. Rena had already stepped into the fray, moving with a lethal grace that belied the chaos surrounding her. She fired with deadly precision, each shot bringing down another enforcer as she pressed forward, her eyes locked on Ven. "Stay down, Raiko," she hissed as she crouched beside her brother, shoving him behind a crate. Her gaze flicked briefly to Jace, something unspoken passing between them. Trust, perhaps, or maybe just desperation. Jace rolled to the side, his focus narrowing as Ven advanced. The man was still smiling, like he was enjoying every second of this. Jace gritted his teeth. Ven's arrogance had carried him this far, but it was about to be his downfall. A plasma bolt skimmed past Jace's arm, scorching his jacket, but he ignored the pain. With a sharp breath, he sprang from cover and fired, hitting one of Ven's enforcers square in the chest. The man went down, his body collapsing in a heap, but before Jace could celebrate the small victory, Ven himself stepped forward. "I've been waiting for this, Varlin," Ven snarled, raising his blaster, eyes gleaming with malice. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long." Jace leveled his blaster at Ven, his muscles tensing, ready for the final confrontation. But before either of them could fire, a new sound cut through the chaos. The sharp, metallic ring of footsteps on the hangar floor. Zaith Koros stepped from the shadows, his metallic skin gleaming under the hangar's emergency lights. His smile was as sharp as ever, his eyes flicking between Jace, Ven, and Rhina. He looked amused. Now, gentlemen," Zaith drawled, twirling a plasma pistol in his hand. "Let's not get too hasty. There's plenty of destruction to go around." Jace's heart sank. Of course Zaith had shown up. He should have expected this, the opportunist swooping in to profit from the chaos. And just like that, the odds had shifted again. 2 enemies. No time to think. Rena's voice cut through the moment, fierce and defiant. "Zaith, you bastard, you made a deal with Ven, didn't you?" Zaith's grin widened. "Deals are my specialty, darling, but this time, I think I'll take my payment up front." And with that, Zaith aimed his pistol at Ven. The room exploded into action. Zaith fired first, hitting Ven in the shoulder and sending him stumbling back, his blaster clattering to the floor. Jace didn't hesitate. In a blur of movement, he aimed and shot, taking down the last of Ven's enforcers. Rhina was already moving toward Ven, her face twisted with cold fury. Ven, clutching his wounded shoulder, tried to retreat, but there was nowhere left to run. Rhina stood over him, her blaster trained on his chest. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm, but Jace could see the storm in her eyes. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was personal. "You betrayed me," Rhina said, her voice trembling with rage. "You betrayed my brother." Ven coughed, blood dripping from his lips. He looked up at her, his smile faltering, but not disappearing entirely. "It's just business, Rhina." Her finger tightened on the trigger, but she hesitated. For a moment, Jace thought she might pull back, that she might let Ven live. But then her silver eyes hardened and the blaster fired. Ven crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The silence that followed was deafening. Rhina stood over the body, her chest heaving with emotion. Jace approached slowly, his own blaster still in hand, but his gaze was fixed on her. The woman who had been both his enemy and his ally. The one he couldn't stop thinking about, even as the stars burned around them. "You did what you had to do," Jace said quietly, his voice cutting through the stillness. Rhina didn't respond right away. She stared down at Ven's body, her expression unreadable. Finally, she turned to Jace, her voice softer now, laced with exhaustion. "It's over." Jace nodded, but the weight of the moment hung between them. They had survived, but something had changed. The battle wasn't just for their lives, it had been for their souls. "We need to get out of here," Jace said, nodding toward the ship, "before the whole cruiser goes up in flames." Rhina glanced back at her brother, who was still slumped behind the crates, then gave Jace a small nod. Together, they made their way to the ship, their footsteps echoing in the empty hangar. As they lifted off, leaving the burning wreck of the stellar dawn behind them, Jace couldn't help but steal one last glance at Rhina. The hunt was over, but the reckoning had only just begun.